Welcome to ACE Committee webinar of Black History Month. So what is Black History Month? Black History Month has been officially celebrated nationally every February in Canada since 2008. Also, in the US, the recognition of Black History Month can be seen as early as 1926, when the father of Black history, Carter Woodson, initiated the first Negro History Week. It was officially recognized in 1976 by President Gerald Ford. During the Black History Month, we celebrate many achievements of Black communities and individuals. We also recognize their immense contributions in many nations and commemorate resiliency and innovation. We work towards a more inclusive and culturally diverse society, and also we aim to educate, support, and be better allies by being actively anti-racist. Did you know that since 1976, every president in the US has given a Black History Month a theme/focus? This year's theme is Black Health and Wellness. The legacy of not only Black scholars and medical practitioners in Western medicine, but also other ways of knowing, etc., birth workers, midwives, etc., throughout the African diaspora. In 2022 theme considers activities, rituals, and initiatives that Black communities have done to be well. This is a famous quote by Martin Luther King Jr. that our lives begins to end the day we become silent about things that matter. First, we'll go through a brief history of slavery and discrimination across the North America. In 1619, the first enslaved Africans landed in Virginia. Then, in 1775, after over 100 years, the first abolitionist meeting took place in Philly. Next, the rise of cotton industry started in 1793, fueled by enslaved people. The slave trade was abolished in British North America on March 25, 1807. And throughout the 18th century, many northern states and US abolished slavery. However, in 1865, the Jim Crow laws appeared, allowing racial segregation. Next, after 5 years, in 1870, Black American men were given the right to vote. And after threatening to march to Washington, an executive order opened government and national defense jobs for every Americans, including Black people. In 1950 to 1960, the Civil Rights Movement after the Civil War. So what is a Jim Crow laws? It is a collection of laws, both local and state level, that enforce racial segregation in public areas, such as washrooms, bus stations, building entrances, etc. African Americans were also unable to live in white neighborhoods. Many states enforced segregation in schools, separating the Black and white students. It existed over 100 years, and anyone who attempted to defy these laws would face arrest, fines, violence, or a jail sentence. The Civil Rights Movement was a protest against Jim Crow and a struggle to gain equal rights for Black Americans that mainly took in the 1950s and 60s. Slavery in Canada. Although Canada enslaved much less people than the United States, Canada still played a destructive role in the time's immoral practices. The transatlantic slave trade occurred in the 16th to 19th century. The black slaves started to replace indigenous slaves in 1763, and the slavery played a major role and played a major role in shaping slavery and discrimination in Canada. The European merchants would chase goods, often necessities, in Africa for enslaved people, in which the Europeans would sell back to America, and they would have received part of the profits. Slaves weren't seen as humans, but rather objects or goods that could be traded between nations. Some of these slaves were later enslaved in Canada. However, the indentured servitude slowly appeared to replace slavery in Canada. Individuals signed a contract in which they received no money for their work, but the transport, food, shelter for a set number of years. And when the time was done, they were free to go as they pleased. During the transition out of slavery, often slaves had to serve their masters under these contracts before freedom, some of them which served for 7 years. From 1867 to 1949, almost 1,200,000 children were shipped to work as indentured servants. Next, I'll be discussing prominent figures and exploring unsung and inspiring historical and modern day figures. Nat Turner, 1800 to 1831. In the U.S. history, Nat led the only successful slave rebellion. With 6 other slaves, he killed his masters, the Travis family, which sparked the anxiety and concern across the South United States. Although seen as an act of bravery, his defiance and the concern that spread across the South led to a violent massacre over 200 Black people. Next is Henrietta Lacks, born in 1920 and died in 1951. After her cerebral cancer diagnosis, and without her consent, a sample of her cancer cells were taken by a researcher. Now, her genes have been responsible for countless revolutionary discoveries in medicine. They have been used to test the effects of radiations and poisons, to study the human genome, to learn more about how viruses work, and played a crucial role in development of polio vaccine by Johns Hopkins. Next is a young girl named Claudette Colvin. When she was 15 years old in 1955, she chose to not sit at the back of the bus, which she had to because of the segregation law, also called Jim Crow laws of the time. This act of defiance led to her arrest. Although Rosa Parks' resistance was well known, Colvin was the first woman to be detained for defiance. Next is Bayard Rustin, and he worked behind the scenes on the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King became widely known for. He was a primary organizer and strategically planned it to ensure success. Next is Marsha P. Johnson. She's a Black trans woman and an activist for LGBTQ+ movement. She was a founder of The Star, which was a nonprofit that helped find housing for homeless queer youth, fought for freedom and equal rights through Gay Liberation Front. She was one of the individuals who incited the Stonewall riots, which led to protests for LGBTQ+ rights across the U.S. Next, this is some of the current prominent figures who are Black. First is Tarna Burke, who founded the Me Too movement in 2006. And she wanted to empower people through empathy. Next is Raphael Warnock, and he was Georgia's first Black senator, and his win helped the Democrats gain control of the Senate. Next is a scientist named Dr. Kia Corbett, and she was one of the lead scientists who developed the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. She was able to help design it within 2 days after discovery of the virus. Next is systemic racism and continuing issues. Discrimination based on race in society that exists in all facets of life. This is a previous anti-racism webinar that you can check it out. First, police brutality. In both US and Canada, Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color are arrested and assaulted by police at disproportionate rates. For example, George Floyd was murdered by police on May 25, 2020. He was unarmed as a police officer, had his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. He told them many times that he couldn't breathe. George Floyd murder was heavily reported and unsparked protests around the world as a call to end police brutality, systemic racism, white supremacy, and to defund the police. The famous words, "I can't breathe," was uttered by dozens of fatal police holds across the US. Also, Mohammed Abu Mohamed and Rodney Brown, Alicia Thomas, and many others were all Black people killed by police. The names are countless. This is a visual statistics in Canada where hate crimes by motivation based on race or ethnicity. In 2008, the graph showed that Black Canadians were more likely than any other racial group in Canada to be victims of a hate crime, according to the data reported by police. This is a source by CTV News. And this is other graph that shows inequality for the people of color. Now, I'm going to give it over to Sienna.
Thank you so much for starting us off, Felix. We will now be talking about support and allyship. What can you do to support movements and contribute to social change? There are many ways to support the Black community, whether that be educating yourself, volunteering, donating, or attending protests. Everyone has a part to play in being actively anti-racist. And here are some ways that you can do that. As we are in a pandemic and due to other circumstances, we also must recognize that not everyone has the means to give at this time. However, you can support by sharing these organizations, getting involved, and showing support through non-monetary ways. You can support programs that fight for social justice and equity. So if you have the means, you can consider donating to organizations like Black Lives Matter or the Equal Justice Initiative, which are committed to bringing awareness to and ending white supremacy and violence, mass incarceration, unfair sentencing, and issues that disproportionately affect Black people. The first link here is a link to 19 organizations supporting Black Canadians, and the second link is 168 ways to donate and support, and this is for US organizations. You can also support Black-owned business. When you're considering of making a purchase or going to a restaurant, find places that are Black-owned in your area. Black-owned businesses often face difficulty securing loans and accessing federal aid programs. In the face of lockdowns and restrictions, it is crucial more than ever to support Black-owned businesses to help them stay operational. You can find businesses to support through directories, and we have linked two below. Essentially, they are search engines where you can input your area, and they will give you Black-owned businesses to support. The first one is an Afrobiz directory, and it applies to Canada, and it provides you a list of multiple types of businesses, whereas the second link is for Black-owned restaurants, primarily across the US. Educate yourself. I think that this is one of the most important things, especially for those of us who have societal privilege. In order to continue to actively deconstruct our beliefs about race, we must educate ourselves, listen, and amplify voices of color. So here are some links below to get you started. They are both articles. One of them is a list of books to read about anti racism, and the other one is a list of movies to watch about protests against racism. Remember that after you digest these works, take time to reflect on what you learned, implement these lessons into your life, and most importantly, share and amplify these messages with those around you. Have difficult conversations. For non Black people, anti racist work first begins at home. This means sometimes having uncomfortable conversations about racial injustice, harmful racial stereotypes, and police brutality within your family and friends. Stand up for what's right and take the time to educate those around you. Above all, the greatest way to show support is creating a sustainable plan towards being actively anti racist. Whether that be setting up recurring donations, diversifying the media and literature you consume, or supporting Black owned businesses, keep doing your part to support Black communities and people of color. So these are some links to further learning. Justice in June is a document put together by some other people in the community, and it points to informative movies to watch and books to consume this month. It also provides a really wonderful in-depth schedule you can follow, so you can intentionally take time out of every day to spend time about learning how to be an active ally. The link below it is another anti racism document filled with countless resources, books, movies, articles, essentially any type of media you can think of. And finally, I put together a document of resources in which all of the resources and links mentioned in this entire presentation are in one place, so you can access it all and more. And below are two videos that I think are quite wonderful. The first one is a really well spoken TED Talk where he talks about how Black history is American history. And the second one is a video that explains exactly what it means to be anti racist and actively so. So, thank you so much for listening, everyone. We really hope that you learned a lot and will take the time this month and throughout the entire year and the rest of your lives to make a difference and educate yourselves and those around you. Thank you again.